Hello Booktube, welcome back to Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. We are joined again by our guests Kat and Ryan from Kat's from Biblio Obscure. Ryan is her husband.
He's just Obscura.
I'm
Biblio, he's Obscura.
Yeah, that
you
sounds
rarely
right.
see him.
Yeah, I'm just hidden away in the back somewhere, just like a gremlin feeding you
No,
books.
oh come on. He's
fine.
in D&D dungeon.
It's fine. Whatever it is. Like I said, like a gremlin, like a goblin. We're all good. Anyway, what are we doing today?
I think we should just explore this gremlin goblin situation. We were going to discuss Australian literature and the cringe factor that a lot of people have with Australian literature.
A lot of Australians have.
Yes.
See, which I didn't know was a problem. So I'm American. So I didn't realize that was a thing until you said that.
It's really interesting because as an Aussie booktuber, one of the most common questions we get asked is, what Australian author do you recommend? And I mean, if I'm honest, I've read like 2.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, legitimately.
Damn.
Like, I avoid Australian, any kind of culture.
Really?
Yes.
I guess when I moved here, I was like, I want to know about... So every August, I read only Australian.
You've definitely read more Australian books than anyone else on this couch.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Oh. Potentially,
If
from
you've
the
read
three
more
of us
than-
combined.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I think I've read more than 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I've probably read 10 Tim Winton books because I actually quite liked Tim Winton growing up. But he is one of 2 Australian authors.
Got you.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or maybe 3.
Well, have you read the popular one, like Jane Harper?
No.
Nope.
Jane Harper's great, though.
Her movie's been made into a book.
Yep.
Her book's been made into a movie.
Sometimes it feels like it happens the other way around.
That definitely is what it feels like. Yeah. I suppose. So the other day I was on Audible, and Audible had a whole bunch of free books, and I was like, "Oh yes, free books." And I looked, and they were all like bush-based Aussie, like historical romances, and I was like, "Oh,
Thanks.
come on, can we, like maybe they'll mix it up and have one that's about cricket or something." like it's only about 2 things. It's about the bush or it's about sport.
It's definitely like our perception of our own culture is a little bit like I cringe at what other countries might perceive us as.
Yeah.
Like that throw another shrimp on the barbie.
Yeah.
We're all surfers, footy playing, and none of them know what footy is because that's the Melbourne thing.
It's true.
But that's what we think it is.
Yeah.
And anything that sort of reflects that back at me, I don't read it.
There's that instinctive kind of squick factor. Of
But
just
to be fair, I wouldn't read that either. But every single book I've read hasn't been that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that we assume that it's going to be this stereotypical Aussified.
Yeah, we're clearly actually being racist against our own race.
Yeah.
Like,
Against Australians.
we've all said like stereotyped horrible
Is that
things.
like anti-xenophobic?
It's like
Reversing xenophobic.
But I would say that there
Self-hating.
is... I can't speak for you two, but certainly growing up, there was an awful lot of that Australiana cringe in the school curriculums that we were reading.
Oh
Like,
my god, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's where
That's where I'm picking this up.
Yeah, but that's where I liked Tim Winton from because
Sure.
there was but like a lot of his kids-based stuff is really the Australiana cringe.
But Tim Winton is Australiana cringe.
Yeah. I just kind of like the way he writes.
Sure.
So he passes.
Yeah.
He's cringe that you'll
Just-
accept. Sure.
Yeah, I'm probably over it now, but
Yeah.
in my 20s, it was cool.
I actually only read my first Tim Winton like a year ago.
Yeah, you read Breathe?
Breath, yeah.
Breath?
Oh,
I read Cloud
Surfing?
Street last year. It was my first.
It's not about surfing. Everyone
It's
who
not
says
about
it's about surfing
They're
is
lying.
I haven't read it. The cover has
It's-
guys surfing on it.
it's a raunchy thing.
Yeah. It's breath play. It's yeah.
Yeah! She's shocked. Everyone's like, this surfing book. I'm like, it's not about surfing at all.
You didn't say it was breath play. Just sitting in the bed next to me reading about asphyxiation casually.
It's also about surfing. But really, it's not.
It's really not about surfing. It's set in
Yeah.
a surfing environment.
Yeah.
Well,
But yeah, it was fine, but
Yeah.
I actually got some of that Australiana cringe from it though. Like,
Yeah.
he's talking about, he's like in this beat up old combi van and he straps the surfboard to
I
it.
mean, he's totally like his image of himself, like
Yeah,
the
the
author insert characters, and his image of himself is totally that dude.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
But like even some of the other stuff I read at school, like the Shark Net or something. I don't know if you ever read that. That was like set in this whole like sepia toned Australiana beach town. I feel like they're all like that.
Yeah.
Is it just that we read rubbish stuff
In
and therefore
school.
we think it's all like that?
Yeah, there's great stuff.
There is great. I
I've
mean,
read
I
great
like Jane
stuff.
Harper. Yeah.
Jane Harper's good if you like mystery thriller. There's another one called the Caleb Zellick series by Emma Viskick. It's about a hearing impaired detective who solves crimes in Melbourne, and his girlfriend, ex-wife, is Aboriginal.
I mean, that sounds interesting, but as soon as you said Melbourne, I was like, switch off.
No, it's interesting.
Really built into me.
It's so weird.
I want to participate in Aussie April this year because I feel like this is actually like a blind spot in my reading. And the way I've sort of tricked myself into doing it is I've picked all Indigenous books because that's not cringy to me. I'm actually super interested in Indigenous books. But I have on my bookshelf something that came in a book box. It's called Lucky's, and it's about Greek Australians in Melbourne, which is a very Melbourne
has
story.
Very Melbourne kind of story.
Yeah, running their own business and that, like of course. And I don't know if I'll ever pick it up because it's just a bit.
I just finished yesterday. That was fantastic. It's called Growing Up African in Australia. It's about people from the African diaspora, and every single chapter is a different short story, but it's they're coming from somewhere. It's Africa and also Black diaspora. So there's Brazil as well and Jamaica as well as the continent of Africa, and how they came to Australia and what they faced in Australia. And it was so good. I give it, I think, 4.5 stars.
That totally interests me.
It was really good.
But to me, that's a book that's not about Australian culture.
But it is though. But it's the intersections of like some, depending on where they're from and what skills they had and what skills their parents had. It really like can set them up. And then there's like maybe 4 stories of people from Zimbabwe, and the way that each person came to Australia was so different, and like they're from the same place, but they're not all created equal when they come here.
Yeah.
And just the ways that they are slightly ahead of other people keeps them out of crime, keeps them in education, depending. And I found it so fascinating. But it was one of the, I was saying, nonfiction makes me get really like upset.
Yeah.
So yeah, I read it all month long, like a few before bed, because the stories would just be very upsetting.
The title reminded me, I saw on Instagram today a new release, Growing Up in Australia as a Disabled Person by, what's her name? She's a disability advocate. She's got a skin condition. I want to say Claire, but I'll look it up and we'll put it on the thing. So that's maybe watch Scott put it over here. Just so you know the knob.
Just put it over
my
his
face.
right here.
Mike Wazowski me. That's great.
Yeah. All Mike Wazowski all day.
Just the whole video has something over my face. That'd be great.
Don't tempt me.
You've clearly not seen the video with the hats. I made a comment like that about hats, and Scott gave me
you
like, hats the whole time.
Amazing.
They were not always hats. Sometimes they were people.
A very absurdist view of what a hat was. It started out sensible and it went a bit Monty Python by the end.
Oh, something else I want to talk about. I was saying a lot of some British or UK booktubers, they get sent Australian literature instead of
Sending it to
Australian reviewers because the UK reviewers have bigger audiences.
But is it because they have bigger audiences, or is it because Australian reviewers don't read Australian books?
But have publishers ever reached out to them?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can't think of many.
We're talking about adult, by the way.
Yeah.
Not YA.
Yeah, I can't think of any really big Australian channel that's not a YA channel.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
And if you exist, say hello.
Say hello.
We've certainly never been reached out by a publisher, so if you are a publisher...
We'll take your books. Okay, thanks.
They read adult, and they're Australian.
Yeah. I will read an
They're
Australian
even willing
book
to
if
read
you give it to me.
Australian books, apparently.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm trying, but I am focusing on Indigenous to start with.
I think going back to the Growing Up African in Australia book, I think that there's two things here that I think make that book interesting to me as opposed to any other Australian book. It's that firstly, I'm not being asked to empathise with somebody that I could have gone to school with, because I didn't go to school with anybody who was from Africa. Everybody I went to school with was white. There was one South American kid, and that was it. And like, so that's a different person to empathise with. And two, it sounds like it's going to critique the society rather than celebrate it. And I think that as somebody that lives in Australia, we can see the problems with Australian society and to celebrate it rather than like it just seems like
especially when the people in power are turning a blind eye to all the problems. Like, if everyone was acknowledging that our country is problematic and that we need to work on some shit, and we were working on it, then maybe you would celebrate your successes as you go along. But the people in power don't want to talk about the problems. So our literature should really be angry.
Yeah.
And a lot of like the big, like the classic UK authors like Dickens, Hardy, George Orwell, they all critiqued society. Jane Austen, the Brontes, they're all critiquing society in their works. And I don't feel like we have that.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Not to go back to Tim Winton too often, because whatevs, but his big, like, subversive push is all about environmentalism and that sort of thing. And I feel like we have so many more political issues than just environmentalism. And that falls flat after a while. And I think there's a reason why people tend to read him in their 20s and not much further.
So thinking about, just to bring it back to your that point about, like, what are these big novels critiquing? The only other Australian author I could name who I've read recently would be, like, Christos Tsiolkas for, like, The Slap and Barracuda, but that's much more about sort of the immigrant experience.
Yeah.
Which is a critique of Australian society, but it also totally isn't. It's about a very specific kind of subculture within Australian society, which still doesn't twig my kind of Australiana cringe, because it's not asking me to base my character on this kind of stereotypical white Australian cultural archetype, even though it is still making some of those critiques of society, it's not doing it holistically. It's doing it from very sort of
like a narrow field.
Yeah, a very specific focus of it, which still doesn't. It feels like it doesn't have that same impact as some of those classic British authors you talked about.
You can't get behind it, can you?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can agree with it, but you can't feel it.
Right.
I think hopefully that makes sense.
I know that I was just trying to think of ones that critique society, and I know that we both have it, and it's an Indigenous person, and it's Terra Nullius.
Yeah.
Which it flips society into day and nighters, which is very similar to. There's an element in Rant by Chuck Palahniuk.
Yeah.
Where there's day and nighters as well. And but this is day and night in Australia. And I'm not sure. The writer is Aboriginal.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure which is Aboriginal in the book, day or night. Or if it is even that. I haven't read it.
It's on my list.
Yeah.
It's very high on my list. Of the Indigenous books that I purchased for April, The Yield, Blood, and Terra Nullius are probably the ones I'm most eager to get to. But I've bought a few more than that.
I can't think off the top of my head. I recently read a whole bunch, but like they're library books. So I don't know what it is about library books, but I like forget the titles easier. I think it's because I don't see them always on my shelf.
Yeah.
Like on the flip side, would you be interested in reading a book about New York City?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh, hell no. I think that's cringe. I absolutely would not read a book about New York City. So when you're like, oh, about Melbourne, I'm like, ew, no, because New York's like the tourist. Everyone's like, oh, New York. And I'm like,
Interesting.
So it's the same. I think reading about Melbourne and reading about Australia is cool
because you're not from here.
If we're not from here.
But do you feel like that way about all American literature, or is it only like subsets of American literature that?
No, only subsets about New York City. So it would be like yours about Melbourne. But actually, I quite like American literature, although I'm trying to read less of it.
Yeah.
I'm just
it
trying
is
to
quite dominant.
Yeah,
so,
spread out. Yeah.
I'm curious to wonder though if other like, do New Zealanders have New Zealand cultural cringe and don't like not want to read New Zealand literature? Like, is that a thing?
Also, are we, so used to seeing the stereotype because there's so much less Australian literature produced than like American literature, for example.
Right.
True. Probably.
Yeah.
Don't you reckon?
I definitely think because there's a sort of a time period I think attached to this sort of. I don't want to call it bogan archetype, but that's what I mean. Like,
yeah, it's fine.
But is it not also like what still sells?
To who? Not to me.
To bogans.
Bogans don't read.
Well, kids in school are reading it.
Maybe it's the education system's fault.
Maybe it's schools
maybe
that
it's
are the
teachers
only.
that are teaching.
Oh. I mean, some of the choices schools make are not good. I'm teaching a novel at the moment, which is about, the experience of a young Aboriginal boy during invasion, written by a white person, which is great.
That's horrifying. Do you get to talk about why that's horrifying?
I have started to. We've only just started the book, but yeah. So that's like not ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, some schools make rubbishy book choices. That's probably part of it.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's part of it from my experience. Like, I look back at what Australian literature did we explore.
Yeah.
And it was all trash. Like, it was all in that vein of surfers and barbecues and...
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Rugby and...
Ours in America is like old time. Like,
do you get to read like Huck Finn and stuff? Yeah,
Huckleberry Finn, Of Mice and Men, Iliad, Odyssey. Like, that is old. We don't read like what would be a modern American.
Read that. Like,
true.
I did Of Mice and Men in like
Of Mice and Men like gets it like year 9 and 10. But
I didn't do Of Mice and Men.
Oh, 1984 or no, what's the other one? The Farm.
Animal Farm.
Yeah. I did both of those.
Yeah, that kind of starts a little bit later, but even then there'll be that, and then it'll be balanced with some, story about some like random 16-year-old white kid having a trouble.
Holden Caulfield.
Yeah, Holden Caulfield in Australia.
Did you guys do movies? We studied Muriel's Wedding in like year 11.
Really?
Yeah.
In year 11?
Yeah. And I went to a very expensive private school.
Year 11? No.
We did Frontline, which is much better than Muriel's Wedding, I have to say.
Yeah, I did not enjoy dissecting the imagery in Muriel's Wedding.
I mean, maybe I need to go back and watch Muriel's Wedding with a critical eye. But...
No, you don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry I even put the thought in your head.
Is now the time that I think most Australian movies are cringy?
Oh,
yes!
No, they are.
Even
absolutely.
more than books. Like,
Definitely.
so much more than books.
No, the cringe factor through the roof.
Oh, God. Okay. So, the answer is there's great Australian literature, but apparently to Australians it's very cringy. Right?
Yeah, well, I think we probably also should maybe try a bit harder.
Outside of the cringe.
I think maybe we should look for Australian fantasy, Australian thrillers, rather than...
Yeah,
your Australian family dramas, which are just...
the same.
Yeah, we've sort of been sold a type that we don't like.
Although I've read 2 that are really good. One is Womerra, and the other one, I can't remember the name, but it was really good. Do you remember? The Choke by Sophie Laguna. Those are both very good. They're small towns, and they're like family studies, but they're like a snapshot, and they make you really care about the characters. And they're not surfers, and they're not Barbie. No. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
See, and I'm looking over at my TBR bookshelf, and it's sorted by continent, and you can see the Australian section. I actually have picked up quite a lot of Australian books.
Oh, yeah, you do.
But I didn't realise that most of them were Australian when I got them. So that's the other way to get me to read an Australian book, is don't tell me it's Australian.
Oh, gotcha. Sneak it in there.
Yeah, I can see that. Oh, you have it on Robert Drew, The Sharknet, yeah.
Do I?
I read that in Year 9. It's a
terrible shit show?
It's just... The whole book feels like it's set in, like, WA in the 1960s or something, and it's... or 50s or 60s, and it feels like it.
I mean, that's actually a good thing, but... it doesn't make me want to read it.
Well, it sets my cringe off.
Yeah.
It really provokes that cringe response.
That's so interesting.
I don't know if it was a good book. I read it for school. Like...
yeah, that's hard.
It's always going to...
Taint.
Good books might get tainted by that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a common...
Yeah.
So is there a good Australian book that we've all read, other than Kat, who has clearly read a million good Australian books?
The Dry was great. It was fun.
The Dry is great, yeah.
What is that?
That's Jane Harper.
It's the most famous one.
It's the one they
It's
just
the
made into
first
a
in the
movie with Eric
series.
Banner.
Yeah. It's a thriller.
You're allowed to have
Detective
cringe with
thriller.
Eric Banner, but it's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because that was my response.
Yeah.
I mean, they put Porter in it.
I can't think of a book that... No. All the Australian ones, they're not as popular, I guess, as, like... most people probably don't know about them.
Yeah. I think my best Australian book I've read is Dark Emu, which probably isn't that available outside of Australia.
And I don't know if it would have the same impact for people who hadn't been through the Australian education system.
Yeah. But if you are Australian and you're looking for a non-fiction book about Aboriginal culture, that is an excellent book.
You can check out Scott's review.
Do you have...
I'll link it. Do I have... No, I don't, and hopefully I will after April.
Ooh.
Yeah, I like... Yeah. That's where I'm at.
I like The Choke by Sophie Laguna. That's one of my top. And then Growing Up African in Australia. But that one's obviously intersectional.
That sounds fabulous, that
I
one.
just finished it yesterday. And like I was mad because I wanted to bring it today, but I couldn't renew it at the library. It was due yesterday. And I was like, I'll just renew it and bring it here to show you guys. And then someone had a hold on it. And I was like, curses! The last day. I'll be late if I... And I would I've never been late at the library.
Oh,
I should get
so good.
I should
So
get a
I don't go to
badge.
the library because I can't stick to deadlines. So I just don't use the library because it would be mean of me.
Because it will cost more than buying a new book in fines.
Oh my god, yes. Yes.
Yeah. That just sounds fabulous. I think I'm going to hold that this week. I think that sounds good.
I thought it was excellent. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I think that probably...
Wraps up our cringy discussion.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments what is a different Australian book that you really like.
Yeah,
Give us
something that doesn't
left
fall into
field.
that horrid archetype.
No surfers, no shrimp on the Barbie.
Yeah. No sport.
No
No sport.
Please.
Please, no sport.
Yeah, so not those three.
Yeah.
It's a really male-driven
Yeah.
like thing in my head as well. Like, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever read a book, an Australian book with a female protagonist.
What? No, no. The Choke is.
Well, again, I
Well,
said I haven't read.
all
Sorry,
the books I just named are by females or the editors are females. I really don't
I
read that
think
many
this
men.
is really
I only read
interesting.
80% women,
Yeah.
like 10% non-binary, 10% men. I have a bias.
Just the one.
Yes.
Is it a bite if you're doing it deliberately?
I'm doing it deliberately.
Yeah.
I'm doing it deliberately.
I'm an intentional bias. I'm trying to balance society by saying.
Yes. When we have equal pay, then I will equal my reading.
That's what I say about doing the dishes.
It's actually kind of.
Hey, I'll pay you as much to do the dishes as I get paid to do them.
No, societal. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Again, check out Kat's channel if you haven't already. It is fantastic.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.